Today we're going to be looking at a piece that's very upbeat and happy, very different from what I've been writing lately, which has mostly been very dark. And quite frankly, the world's in a pretty dark place right now, so I thought I would inject some joy into it. Now, I don't know about you, but when I get up in the morning, for some reason I'm overly optimistic. When I take a shower or when I'm talking to the cats in the morning, I'm singing these crazy little melodies. They're usually very forgetful, but I thought I would try to remember one and then come up and turn that into a piece of music. So we're going to look at that. I've orchestrated it also for a pit orchestra. So let's jump right in and look at this melody and how I've harmonized it. Here's the first 8 bars of the melody that I was singing. At least it's the part that I could remember. I originally sang this in B flat, but I've transposed it to the key of G because it's going to fit the orchestration that I've done better. All right, let's take a listen to just that first 8-bar phrase. So you can hear this is a very upbeat and carefree melody. And I've named this piece Carefree. It's the first one I'm going to call a series of shower tunes. So when I was coming up with the accompaniment pattern for this, I thought about this character that Martin Short used to do named Irving Cohen. And it was based on a real Tin Pan Alley composer named Irving Caesar. And he would say, "Give me a C, a bouncy C," and the piano would play. And then he would sing some funny melody over the top of it. So I think that that's what I was thinking while I was coming up with this kind of boom chick accompaniment in the piano. So let's look at the chords that I've chosen. Starting in measure 1, I'm outlining a G major triad with this G, B, D, and B. So I've chosen the 1 chord, the G chord, to start the piece. We immediately move outside of this G major sound with this D sharp and F natural, which are not part of our G major scale. The way I've decided to harmonize this measure is by using what's called a chromatic mediant. And a chromatic mediant is a chord that's some sort of third, either minor or major, away from this G chord. So you can go up a minor or major third, or down a minor or major third, and that's the mediant portion of chromatic mediant. The chromatic portion of chromatic mediant is that one of the chord tones has to not be part of this G major scale, the chord that we're coming from. So I went up a major third, picked the B major triad because it has a D sharp, which is not in our G major scale, and that is how I harmonize this measure. This F natural, the flat 5, is a little bit unusual, but that's how I was singing this melody. And I really like this F natural, the added flat 5, or you could consider it a sharp 11, against the B major chord. It helps add to that kind of quirkiness and carefree attitude of the piece. Let's listen to this first 4 measures where we go from G to our chromatic median B, back to G, back to our chromatic median. And let's just see how that melody works with those chords. Moving on to bar 5, we go back to the G major chord via this G sharp 6 chord. A G sharp 6 chord is basically just the triad, G sharp triad, with the 6th degree, which is in the melody here, added in. So it's got this kind of sound. You could also think of that as A flat 6. Now, I could have made this a little bit stronger if I had put the 7th degree in here and made this a dominant chord. It would have been the sub 5 of our 1 chord. Here we have the sub 5 of 1 right here, this G sharp 7 going to G. So I could have added in that chord tone, that flat 7, and it would have sounded like this. You know, it's a little bit stronger going back to our G sound. But either way, I could always add that in the orchestration later. Moving past that, we go to this F sharp major chord, and why did I pick that? Well, the melody has a C sharp and an F sharp in it, and I just liked how it sounded, so that's where I went. Then we go back to our G chord again, and for the turnaround here, I used a D augmented sound. Now, normally you would use maybe a D7 sound here, the 5 of 1, but I used the D augmented chord because, again, I thought it added to this quirky feeling and this carefree attitude. Moving through the rest of it, for the second half, this was all new material that I had to come up with once I came up here because I forgot what I sang for the second half of this. So I went back to our chromatic mediants, going from G to B to G. And then instead of going back to B here, I put in this 2-5 going back to G. So it's really our sub 5, our G sharp 7 going to G. And that makes this D sharp minor chord, the 2 of our sub 5, an important moment in the piece. Before we were going from G to B to G to B. So a major sound there, but now we have this D sharp minor sound there. And what I decided to do was change the dynamic to forte here and put a big accent on that moment. And then for the final build-up, we drop back down to piano and then work our way back up to forte for this final moment. So these chords here came out of the melody itself that I worked out first. So we do G to C, and then we go down a half step and go F sharp to B, and then we have this C, F to 5 to 1. So those are the chords and the melody for this piece. Let's take a listen to this piano sketch, and then we'll come back and see how I've orchestrated it. Now that we've heard this piano sketch and it's fresh in our minds, I think we should take a listen to the full orchestrated piece. I did make one small change. I added in that dominant 7 into our G sharp 6 chord, so now it's a G sharp 7 chord. That'll be a little bit stronger moving into this G chord. So we've got that F sharp now in the French horn part. We've got the actual piano part up now, not the sketch. So let's take a listen to all this and then we'll come back and break it down. Well, there's our G, our bouncy G, a very carefree little piece. This was a lot of fun to do, and I orchestrated it with this pit orchestra. And a pit orchestra is just a smaller size orchestra that you would see accompany a Broadway show, something like that. I played in quite a few pit orchestras in my day. I played trumpet, and those were always a lot of fun. Those were really carefree days. There were a lot of shenanigans that went on in the pit orchestra. So I think that's why I ended up orchestrating it for this smaller size pit orchestra, which I think really works well for this piece. It kind of sounds like one of those pieces at the end of a scene that might play a character off. So let's look at the instrumentation here. I've got a flute 1 and a flute 2, and this flute is doubling on alto saxophone, and that's very common in a pit orchestra. There's a lot of doublings, especially in the woodwinds. We have an oboe, a clarinet, a bassoon, 1 French horn, 1 trumpet, 1 trombone, and a tuba. So it's a very small section here in the winds. We have 2 percussionists, one playing timpani and another playing flexitone and xylophone on this piece. The flexitone is such a cool little instrument, and I love using it. It makes some very unique sounds that I'm sure you've heard in some of the early cartoons. This is what a flexitone looks like. You hold it here, this is the handle, and then by shaking it, these two beaters hit against this piece of thin metal to make the sound. Here's a classic flexotone sound. And you hear there that the pitch was rising. The way that you get the pitch to rise is by pushing this piece of metal in with your thumb, and that gets the sound of the flexotone to change pitch. You're not looking for a specific pitch with the flexotone. You can also take one of these beaters off and get different kinds of sounds. This is kind of another classic sound. So the flexotone doesn't make a lot of different sounds, but the sounds that it does make are unique. I've also used a drum set in this piece. Here they're playing with brushes. There's a piano. Most shows that I played in all had piano parts. The newer ones, oftentimes the piano player is also doubling on synthesizers. And then we have single string players, one violin 2, one viola, one cello, and one bass. These parts are sometimes doubled, so you'll have 2 on each part except for the bass. I've seen that before, even slightly larger than that, but that would be kind of a typical size. This is 18 players. Most of the pit orchestras I played in were somewhere right around 20 players. They can be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, but this is a pretty typical size of a pit orchestra. Let's look at a few things to listen for in the orchestration. To start, we have the melody in our flute, our alto saxophone, and our oboe. Let's hear that. And so that can really stand out, I've not put any kind of strings underneath it here. It's pretty much all woodwinds and this brass. Our offbeats are being played by the clarinet, our French horn, and our trombone. So I've taken those chords that we looked at, and then I've written this little line between these 3 players to play these offbeats. Let's listen to what that sounds like. So, by writing lines, you can get more of a movement in the harmony. It doesn't sound like it's just a static harmony that's going back and forth between a few chords. Moving farther on, here's another doubling I love, the alto saxophone and clarinet, where we hit this section where it kind of quiets down a little bit before that big hit. This doubling is just really wonderful. And we've got this very chromatic line being played over those chords. And you can see that you can get away with that because we're hitting chord tones on the important beats, and that chromaticism is moving between the beats. So we can write these very chromatic lines and they still seem to make sense. I didn't bring the piano in until the ending on this big hit and then the build-up, because the piano can take up a lot of space, especially in a sparse orchestration like this. The woodwinds are really the main feature in the beginning of this piece. I've also saved the strings here to come in once we hit this quieter section, and they're playing pizzicato, and then they have time to switch and play arco here. They can switch pretty quickly, but you always want to consider giving them some room to make that switch. Let's take a listen to just the strings. Writing this little piece really brought me a sense of joy. It was a very therapeutic thing for me to do, and I hope you'll give something like this a try. We all have these melodies that go through our head during the day, and a lot of times they just float off into the ether. But if we can capture them, maybe there's something we can do with them. Long ago, I would carry around one of those little mini cassette recorders and I would sing into that. And even before that, I used to have to find a landline and call my answer machine and leave, hey, Glenn, here's the melody, or here's the first violin part. My wife would hear it back and think I was a little crazy. So give this a try, and I hope it brings you some joy too. Let's listen one more time to Carefree, and I'll see you all next time.